First off, I would like to apologize for the lighting in this video and also for the lack of audio in some parts of this video. My workbench is actually located outside, and during the filming of this video, there were police sirens and ambulances and, let's just put it this way, I probably don't live in the best neighborhood. Typically when I work on any instrument, be it my own instrument or a customer's instrument, I will actually fully disassemble the instrument and essentially give it a nice once over. As you can see here in this shot, the bridge was, well, heavily caked in dust, and these are actually original strings from the mid-90s. So these strings have been on this bass for quite some time. I wasn't going to replace the strings, instead I used the old boil and pot method, which always seems to work great for me. If the bass strings don't show any actual damage to them, I usually just keep them on. While I was working on this bass, I did notice that there were some minor neck issues. In particular, there was some pretty nasty fret buzz in some areas. So off camera, I actually just went through the entire process of leveling the frets as best as I could, cleaning up the fretboard, and straightening out the neck. Once the neck was removed, I went ahead and started to disassemble the electronics. What's nice about this bass is there was literally no rust at all, and given the fact that this is a bass from the 1990s, that's actually pretty impressive. So here you can see the original ground wires were just hanging on to the top of the potentiometers. The rest of the wiring was surprisingly in good condition. However, the actual potentiometers themselves were just worn out with age. They were very scratchy, and instead of trying to simply clean them out, I decided it would probably be better in the long run just to go ahead and replace all the potentiometers in the base. So this is a fairly simple setup, pretty straightforward. 2 volume pots and the tone potentiometer. The wiring is relatively straightforward. Each pickup has a lead and a ground wire, and essentially what I'm going to do is just remove them from the potentiometers using a pair of clippers. I try to save as much wire coming off of the pickup as I can, simply due to the fact that you never know if you're going to install these pickups in a different project further down the line of time. After the pickup wires have been removed, the next wire to remove would be the ground that's connected to the underside of the bridge. This is typically found on top of the tone potentiometer. With all of these wires removed, I will then go ahead and remove the lead and the ground from the output jack. The way that I go about doing this is I leave a little bit of extra wire on the output jack, so that way I have a visual reminder as to which lug is going to be the lead and which lug is going to be the ground. So with that out of the way, I'll go ahead and remove the potentiometers from the body of the bass. Now, if I'm working on a customer's guitar, I'll typically pull out my socket set and use an actual socket to remove the nuts and the washers. However, this is my own personal bass, so I just grabbed a pair of pliers and just popped them right out. Here you can see just how simple the wiring really is for a typical bass. Both outputs of the volume potentiometers are going to be chained together, and they feed into the center lug of the tone potentiometer. The lead wire is then split off from the center lug of the tone potentiometer, and that is what's fed into the lead lug of the output jack. For this project, I will be reusing the tone capacitor just to save some time and some money. When extracting a tone capacitor off of a potentiometer, always be mindful of the legs of the capacitor. You want to make sure that you're not bending them or twisting them too much, because they will break really easily. You also want to avoid applying too much heat to the capacitor itself. Heat can actually damage capacitors, so try to make it as quick as possible to take these off. So here we see the replacement potentiometers. I decided to go with 250s instead of 500s, simply due to the fact that this base is going to be used for more of like your heavy metal, rock tone, and the 250K potentiometers have a warmer tone to them than the smaller 500Ks. What I'll do is I'll take a small file and I will simply scratch away at the bottom of the potentiometer to create a surface for the solder to adhere to. Some potentiometers have a oil or a grease left over from the manufacturing process that inhibit new solder from being placed on it. However, I did get lucky with this set, and I only really needed to do it for this first potentiometer. The other two, the solder adhered to it just fine. What I'll do initially is just apply a thin coat to each of the lugs. I know some people will actually thread the wire through the eyelet of the lug first before applying solder. Personally, this is just a preference of mine. I like to pre-solder everything first. So usually when I rewire everything, I tend to make all of my grounds green. It's just one of those color-coded memory things that I have. You see green, you know it's going to be ground. And with everything pre-soldered, it's just a quick, easy slip in, let it set, and you're done. The next step is to simply solder the ground to the underside of the potentiometer. This turns the potentiometer into a volume control by allowing you to increase the resistance along the audio path. For the tone potentiometer, you simply use the capacitor that you pulled off earlier in place of the ground wire. Ultimately, you should have 3 potentiometers looking like this: 2 volumes and 1 tone. Next up, we solder the lead outputs for the volume potentiometers on the first lug. Both lead wires coming from the volume pots will be soldered to the center lug on the tone pot. Now, splice a third lead extending off of the tone potentiometer's center lug. Using a pair of clippers, I'll cut the excess wire off. Once that's done, all of the lead outputs from the potentiometers are ready to go. Your wiring setup should look something similar to this. Next up are the ground wires. Solder a ground wire from the bottom of each volume pot to the bottom of the tone potentiometer. Once both volume pots are wired to the tone potentiometer, Add one additional ground wire extending from the tone potentiometer. Once that's done, your wiring should look like this. The ground for each volume pot is soldered to the underside of the tone pot, and each lead from the volume pots are soldered into the middle lug of the tone potentiometer. The tone potentiometer will have one extra ground and one extra lead. Off camera, I decided to line the electronics cavity with copper shielding tape. Now comes the tricky part, resoldering the pickups to the potentiometers. The lead wire from each pickup is soldered to the center lug of the corresponding volume pot. The ground wire from each pickup is soldered to the bottom of the potentiometer alongside the ground wires. I filmed this video back in April or May of 2019, and you can tell that it was so cold outside that my soldering iron was actually having difficulty melting the solder even at maximum temperature. Next up, wire the lead output of the tone potentiometer to the lead lug on the output jack. After that, simply wire the ground from the tone pot to the ground lug on the output jack. And the final wire to solder in place is the ground connected to the underside of your bridge. And with that, it is done. Well, hopefully somebody liked this video and hopefully somebody learned something from this video. I do know that this video was pretty boring and it's not the most exciting topic to talk about, but I thought to myself, you know what the hell, I was just going to rewire the base anyway, so might as well just make a video out of it. I do have some more content in the works. I do not know when it's going to be published, but I am working on some new stuff. So until the next video, I suppose.